A lot of people have been asking about the motion on the Sony A80J, and today I'm here to let you know that it is better than the Sony A90J if you choose to use motion processing. However, if you turn that stuff off and you decide to just not use motion processing because you either hate soap opera effect or you've been told to turn it off by default, either way, without motion processing, this is a horrible TV. There is no other way to say that, and anyone trying to tell you otherwise is literally lying. Okay, so right now I have my motion flow turned on and it's set to custom. I'm just gonna go over some things that I did here. I have smoothness maxed out. We don't do anything for clearness, and high is what I use for Cinemotion. This is basically how you're going to get the best motion out of this TV, at least from what I've experienced. Okay, so as you guys see, motion processing on. But let's say you're a pure snob and nobody watches soap opera effect. Motion processing's terrible. Grr, right? Okay, you disable it. The image is now unwatchable. When panning motion happens, I can't even keep up with the images at the bottom. The one thing I love to use this test for is to measure the amount of stutter or jittery nature a picture will have. It's going haywire. It literally looks like somebody's shaking the picture side to side really fast. And I don't know if you can see it, but if you look at the bottom here, all these images at the bottom, they are really juddery. If you have a Sony A80J, I advise you to run the Spears and Munsell UHD benchmarking disc, turn off all your motion processing, and you'll be greeted with this. This is one of the worst things I've seen. Now we can go ahead and turn off Cinemotion as well to see if that fixes anything, and it doesn't. It actually makes things worse. So again, we have every ounce of our motion processing off, like some guys will tell you to do, and if you are one of those people doing that, this is the kind of imagery that you are going to be treated to. It's juddery, it's choppy, it doesn't make sense, and honestly speaking, I can't even make out the images the moment, like as they're panning by, I can't make out what they are. This is a fundamental problem, and it has everything to do with people trying to say that judder still belongs because cinematic judder is nice. The longer you tell these companies that you want judder in content, the more stuff like this we're gonna see. So again, most TVs look terrible when you don't use motion processing. But unfortunately, the side effect of using motion processing is that you end up with artifacts, and this TV has a substantial amount of artifacts. Cinemotion set to high, we're gonna go back in and we're gonna turn our motion processing back to custom, and you're gonna see a significant amount of artifacts. It's a breaking apart. As you see in between each little tile here, you're gonna see the breaking apart of your image. This happens very frequently with complex geometry. So in real world content, what this will translate to is if you have a scene where it's fast moving and they're panning really fast by a cityscape and you're crossing buildings or windows, you're gonna see that artifacting on those windows. It's not fun. If there's a car scene where somebody's in a car and they start driving by a fence, you're gonna see those artifacts. So these are the sacrifices you make with motion processing. However, when panning motions happen, it will be substantially smoother. You'll be able to make out the images as they're panning by you. The judder and jitter won't be so bad that you won't be able to make out the image. This TV, and I kid you not, this TV has one of the worst out of soap opera effect, out of motion processing motions I've ever seen. Ever in my life. I didn't even know it could be that bad until this TV. So while in one aspect the motion isn't terrible, with motion processing, it's really gonna shift, because if you're somebody that is a pure snob, you're really gonna be treated to some really bad motion. I imagine that that's kind of the aim here though, to make you spend the $3,000 to jump up to the A90J, but spoiler alert, your motion doesn't get better there either. So it's a double-edged sword, it really is. Sony's motion isn't really great and has been on the decline for a while, but at least this is watchable. This is a lot better, in my personal opinion, than the Sony A90J for motion, and that's just my personal take on it. Now we're going to talk about the motion experience when you are just driving around in a game or when you're actually playing something on the screen. I can say again, it's smooth, it's responsive. I see like it's the kind of reverse of the Sony A90J, if I'm being honest. It's more like fast moving objects that go past the screen. They look good, but the artifacting when something intersects, like foliage or buildings, like I was mentioning earlier, that's really going to be the big trip up. This is going to be very noticeable if you have games like Forza where you're, pressing your right bumper or right trigger and you're cycling between texts. This is what's going to look really off on the television. It's not going to look as nice as it should look, and that's just kind of one of the downsides to the motion artifacting that Sony does present this year. Unfortunately, Sony is not really doing a great job at cleaning that stuff up, where, I feel like LG is doing a lot better this year in that regard with their C1. Albeit the C1 is pretty dim for what it's worth because they want to sell the G1, so you really don't win either way. Now that's just talking about with motion processing on, but we haven't actually given motion processing off a fair shake. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead in real time, open up my motion processing, and I'm going to turn motion processing off, all of it, including Cinemotion, all of that off. Okay, now motion processing is off. Immediately, one of the things that was very apparent to me was the amount of jitter as the car passed by me. And generally, as I'm driving, it's just like a choppy, kind of like jittery thing that I'm noticing. Nothing presented is incredibly smooth or really makes sense. And this is kind of reminiscent of all TVs, if I'm being honest, where outside of the motion processing mode, they just don't do their best. But either way, this, like even just slowly taking off as I pass the foliage, each little frame is jittery and stuttery, and it's very, very distracting. It's something that unless you really like stutter and jutter in your content, you're gonna notice and you're not gonna like. And that's kind of the big message here with the Sony A80J and its motion representation and reproduction. It's really not fantastic, right? It can be good in some areas, but ultimately speaking, it does need some limit pledge. It's nowhere close to something like the LG C1 where out of the gate, it's just exceptional motion. And no, LG didn't put me up to saying this. This is just the truth, right? I've been testing this TV and testing it and really running this result like 1,000 times. And honestly speaking, every time I do this result, it's always the same thing. Now, again, this is purely subjective at this point where I just genuinely hate jutter, but there are going to be some people that genuinely hate smooth motion. I don't know how that's possible, but there are people that rather prefer looking at something that chops and jutters. If you like choppy, juttery imagery, this is going to be the best TV on the planet Earth for you, because outside of motion processing, it is the choppiest TV on the market, period.